WiLD Questions. I'm Sabbath Kapahu, and this is the moment we take each week to have the conversations we know are important, but we don't always talk about. This is about the stories that matter behind the questions we ask. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, and CEO of WiLD Leaders, Dr. Rob McKenna. Dr. McKenna, your background is looking different. Where in the world are you?
We are somewhere in Redwoods National Park area. So I'm surrounded by some pretty cool trees. I got to tell you right now, Sabbath.
I love that. WiLD is on the road.
WiLD is in the wild.
WiLD is in the wild. Yes.
That's right. That's right.
You posted a quote today that I wanted to ask about, and I wanted to ask about the idea, and I believe this is a word you have created. Correct me if I'm wrong. I wanted to ask, what is editability? And I want to read the quote first, and then you can answer my question.
Okay.
It's the quote you posted is, our willingness to edit ourselves is the most important part of our character. It all starts there. Tell me what you are thinking about when you say that.
Well, it's that, WiLD stands, as you know, for whole and intentional leader development. And that last word, development, is something we throw around so often. But as we always say, development is change, and change is hard. It's difficult. And so working with leaders over the years, I just realized that there was this thing going on inside of them that was really quite, if we're honest, pretty difficult to do. It was hard for them to change, and at times. And so this word editability, I started talking about it, and I realized, when I thought about what it means to actually edit your work and to have the backspace key hit on things that may even feel like they're part of your character. Because it's one thing to do small edits, but when someone is asking you to actually change something about yourself that feels like it's deeply embedded in who you are, which is so much of what leader development is about, that it's difficult to do. And so I think one of the things that I try to prepare people for as they enter into that process of development is that kind of editing, if anyone says it's easy, I think they're kind of missing the point. And it's and it is difficult. I mean, I'd be the first person to say that, when I am required to change something about myself, or even consider the possibility of changing something about myself, whether it's people I work with or whether it's my wife or my sons, is like, it's a difficult thing to do. And so I think that, one of the powerful pieces of it is that editing process is really what we're talking about. We're talking about taking a look and becoming aware of the things about ourselves that might need to shift or change. And it doesn't mean that, I think the other part of that is that who you are is also a part of that. Like, one of the WiLD questions that we always ask people, right, is that question, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself? And I think the real tension that people face is this process of saying, I am who I am, and at the same time, I am able to become something different than who I am today. If that makes sense.
Yeah. What I hear you talking about is like a level of self-awareness, that we have to begin with the fact that we are who we are, like you said, and we have so much work to do.
Mm-hmm.
The work that we choose to do or not is impacting everybody around us.
Yeah, that's right. And we show that thing, that sigmoid curve, where we talk about how when change begins, that it sometimes will feel like things are getting worse. And I think, if I'm honest, is those moments where I feel like something needs to shift or change, or someone enters even a moment of conflict where there's kind of my convictions are bumping into someone else's, that it immediately it causes pressure. You know what I mean? There's a pressure we feel that's an indicator that something is maybe about to change or maybe necessary for changing. And so then that whole tension comes up, that question of, is this something I'm supposed to take a position on, or is it something that I need to change in order, to move forward? So what you said.
I want to read the copy that came beneath the quote, the comment part of that quote. It says, our convictions matter, but if we aren't willing to change, others around us will lose hope. Change is hard, but so necessary. Developing ourselves as whole leaders is about creating pathways into our real experience that connect our purpose, personality, character, competence, and networks of support in a way that opens our agency and possibilities for becoming better versions of ourselves. Pathways that give us permission to ask the harder questions out loud. So, what I want to hear is it says networks of support in a way that opens our agency and possibilities. Tell me about that.
Oh man, if we could hold that part, just the first part of what you said, I was drawn into that, they say all the time, you hear this all the time, and there's some good research that would support this, that people don't leave jobs or they don't leave organizations, but they leave managers. And I think one of the things when you listen to people's stories about the managers they worked for is it's one thing to say, I just had a bad manager, or, I just worked for a leader who was self-indulgent, or all these other things. But at the end of the day, what they're probably also facing is a person who is not willing to change, is not willing to maybe take a look at some of the things they say that these are positions I'm going to hold, but they're also going to thoughtfully say, these are things that I am willing to change. And I think, from a whole person or a whole leader perspective, this is something that affects us in our family lives, that affects us in our work lives, is imagining, this makes me just, it's hard, like we were saying before, but at the same time, imagine yourself being in a position in relationship to other people, and again, whether it's work or family, where you're with a person who is not willing to edit, is not willing to change. And that's why that issue of hope comes up, is like, there is so much in the possibility, even if you work with coworkers where you just don't see anything changing, and worse than you not seeing anything changing, you don't have any hope that anything will, or that they might be able to see that. And those conversations around change are always difficult to have, but so necessary for us to move forward. And I think that's where we don't talk about hope all the time in organizational work, but it's a thing, right? Is like, if I don't have hope for things getting better, then what are if I'm going to stay, I'm going to remain hopeless, or I'm going to move on to something else.
Yeah.
And then read me what you said, that last part you just said again.
Yeah. So it's talking about the pathways, and that there are networks of support in a way that opens our agency and possibility for becoming better versions of ourselves.
Yeah. This part, there's so much in that concept of agency. Like, agency is this belief, or even the concept of developmental efficacy, as psychologists call it, is like this belief that I could change is an important factor. And we work with a lot of teams or leaders who kind of have lost hope that people will change. But one of the things that we suggest, we talk about all the time as a team, is this reality that in so many cases, people have not been invited to change. They've not been invited well. They've been told they should change, and it's like, or they get this sort of, if this doesn't change, or I see you doing this all the time, as opposed to this invitation into a possibility that I could become a better person. And what we've seen is that when people are actually invited into their own development, like given some other agency back, and so often that occurs through questions, that actually we see people, maybe there's a small percentage who are not ready to actually engage in that possibility that they could do something different. But we've seen people actually turn the corner because they've never been invited well.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think there's something, agency is invited, not commanded. Like, you can't say to a leader, like, give people agency. It won't work that way. But if we teach a leader to actually invite people's own developmental story out, people go like, I didn't even know I had the possibility of becoming a different person, or of seeing where I'm called to be, or of understanding my competence and the things that are my blind spots that I could work on. All that is just something that we aspire at WiLD, I guess, as to invite people better.
Yeah. And even talk about our whole story. I'm imagining what it would be like to invite my family members, my kids, my spouse into a space of agency and possibility, rather than commanding change out of them, which I'm guilty of for sure. So,
and before you tell them, I know you're going to tell them about Friday too, because we're excited about Friday conversation. I'm looking at these redwoods right now, and so often trees kind of strike me when it comes to this concept of accepting yourself or changing yourself. And there is so much in the DNA of these trees, just really incredible to look at. You know what I mean? Like, there is something about what they are wired to do and the way that they're wired to grow, with all that strength. But I'm also looking at a tree right now that's got things carved in the side of it. And it has moss growing. And I see other trees that are like bending a certain way because of the way the wind is blowing off the Pacific Ocean. And it's like the reality that we live in this tension between this acceptance of certain things about ourselves and our personalities that are not likely to change. And then it enters into this dynamic sort of relationship with other people's personalities and the environment we're in. And I think that's just like that concept of these deeper parts of our character. And there certainly are things that are really important to understand, but to not put ourselves so much in a box that we believe that we could not actually change. And so I think that's an amazing tension between our DNA, and our personality, as we would say, and what the environment is doing for us.
Yeah, incredible. Yes. Speaking of invitation, this Friday at the WiLD Conversation, we're wrapping up our Overwhelmed and Underproductive series. And the topic is jobs that are too big. Talk about a hard conversation to have with your team or the person that you're supposed to get that job done for. So we really want to create a space. You are invited to the WiLD Conversation this Friday. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you'll find the links anywhere that you can find WiLD leaders. And tell us a little bit about what you're thinking as you prepare for Friday.
Yeah, I think so many people are experiencing that, where they experience a job that has either grown too big or feels too big. So it may be a perception or a reality. And it's a whole part, a big conversation, that we see so many folks talking about. And so I think we'll get into some science behind, like, what does this really mean? What does it look like? So maybe pull back some of our agency to say, like, what could we actually do? Because so many of us feel like there's nothing we could do, when in fact, there probably is quite a bit that we could do. And it might involve a tough conversation with a boss or a peer, you know what I mean? Or even something related to understanding what your whole life looks like within the perspective of your work. So I'm excited about it. I hope people show up if that sounds something they need.
Yeah, it's going to be a really rich conversation and time to learn with each other. I'm going to finish this off really quick with a WiLD question, pull from our WiLD deck. The question is, are you failing to delegate because you micromanage or because you think you can get it done faster yourself?
That's good.
I love it. We will see you guys next time.